For decades, the Arctic was viewed as Russia's stronghold. Its vast nuclear fleet gave Moscow a clear advantage in navigating northern waters. But in 2025, with the Arctic winter maximum ice cover recorded at its lowest level in history, that dominance faces new pressure from Canada. Ottawa maintains one of the world's larger ice-breaking fleets, with 18 in service, and has begun constructing 2 heavy polar-class icebreakers under the National Shipbuilding Strategy. Canada is now operationalizing sovereignty tools, combining infrastructure upgrades, shipbuilding initiatives, and new legal claims that reshape how the Northwest Passage could function. The quiet buildup began years earlier. Canada's silent buildup in the Arctic. Canada's silent buildup in the Arctic has been defined less by dramatic announcements and more by steady, deliberate investments. For years, these efforts attracted little attention outside Canadian policy circles. On the surface, they looked like small-scale development projects, support for isolated communities, incremental upgrades to supply routes, and modest infrastructure spending in a region that seemed too costly and remote to matter to global trade. But gradually, each step began shaping a more ambitious strategy. By the mid-2020s, the cumulative effect of these measures revealed itself as something much greater than maintenance. A systematic attempt to shift Canada's Arctic position from vulnerability toward capability. The foundation of this effort lay in logistics. Canada's far north faces extreme challenges. Roads are seasonal, air deliveries expensive, and the short summer thaw offers only limited windows for maritime operations. Reliable ports can help overcome those constraints, and here Canada made a pivotal choice. Instead of dispersing investments across multiple speculative sites, Ottawa supported the redevelopment of the Port of Churchill in Manitoba, the country's only existing deepwater Arctic port connected to the national rail network. Managed by the Arctic Gateway Group, a partnership led by Indigenous and community stakeholders, Churchill became the centerpiece of a broader corridor strategy. In 2024, the port's operators signed a Memorandum of Understanding with FedNav, Canada's largest ocean-going, bulk shipping company, to explore extending Churchill's operational season. That initiative tied local development to global commerce, linking relatively small logistical upgrades to the prospect of hosting international shipping as northern waters become more accessible. If port infrastructure created staging points, ships remain the decisive tool. Canada's icebreaker fleet, though already one of the world's larger groups with 18 vessels, had grown outdated and incapable of sustaining heavy polar operations year-round. To address this, Ottawa turned to the National Shipbuilding Strategy. In 2024-2025, contracts were signed for 2 new heavy polar-class icebreakers, with a single ship build valued at around $3.25 billion. $1 of them, Polar Max, began hull work in Helsinki in 2025 as part of the Ice Pact, the Trilateral collaboration signed in 2024 between Canada, the United States, and Finland to share expertise and accelerate construction of polar-capable ships. These new vessels will not enter service until the early 2030s, but the political signal is already clear. They represent not only a reinforcement of logistical capacity, but also long-term commitment to Arctic operations. Unlike Russia's vast fleet of nuclear icebreakers, Canada's strength does not lie in matching tonnage. Its approach is to ensure targeted capability in areas where presence delivers sovereignty, particularly along the Northwest Passage. Defense measures accompanied these civilian and logistical projects. Canada did not mimic Russia's habit of staging large-scale Arctic military drills or showcasing bomber flights over polar airspace. Instead, its investments focused on creating a sustained presence through smaller, distributed forces. The Canadian Rangers, made up largely of Indigenous personnel living in the Arctic, were given expanded roles within national defense planning, ensuring that communities themselves were integrated into surveillance and emergency response. That force structure was paired with new surveillance equipment, improved radar coverage, and upgraded communications, enabling Ottawa to coordinate activity across a region larger than most nations. Military improvements in the north rarely produced attention-grabbing headlines, but they had a practical purpose. to develop reliable, everyday capacity that could respond quickly when incidents occurred, whether environmental or geopolitical. Taken together, these steps have altered the balance of expectations in Arctic politics. Ports like Churchill are no longer treated simply as local economic lifelines. They now serve as nodes through which longer shipping seasons can be tested and extended. Icebreakers are no longer solely maintenance assets, but long-term investments designed to reinforce Canadian claims to operational control. Defense initiatives, while modest in scale compared to Russia's sprawling installations, have created a resilient baseline of presence across territory that was once patrolled only sporadically. Rather than equaling or exceeding Russia's Arctic machine, the significance lies in Canada visibly narrowing capability gaps in specific areas: escort operations, search and rescue, and reliable surveillance that directly affect control of the Northwest Passage. One reason the transformation remained underestimated in its early years was that it unfolded through the accumulation of seemingly ordinary measures. When community-based companies announced investment in Churchill, the news was viewed primarily as local development. When Ottawa outlined plans for new polar-class icebreakers, delays and high costs made observers doubt their impact. Yet, as these initiatives matured and linked together, their combined effect became difficult to ignore. Each new training exercise by the Rangers solidified sovereignty in remote regions. Each upgrade to the port hinted at integration into continental and even transoceanic trade. Each icebreaker under construction signaled a future in which Canada could field heavy polar capacity independently. By 2025, this layered buildup reached a point where Russia began to take notice. Moscow no longer saw a passive neighbor to its east, but a country capable of competing in defined spheres of activity. Canada's efforts do not replicate Russia's scale of icebreaking fleets or extensive northern military installations. What they do is build a credible system of infrastructure, shipping, and defense sturdy enough to protect sovereignty and influence maritime traffic through its own Arctic waters. In a region where physical presence often carries as much weight as formal treaties, this represents a meaningful shift. What makes this development more striking is the timing. Ottawa's expanded role has matured just as natural barriers in the north are undergoing rapid change. The ability to operate ports year-round or deploy icebreakers effectively is not simply a matter of hardware. It hinges on whether the ice itself will permit passage and for how long. Environmental shifts are reconfiguring the operating landscape faster than any shipyard schedule or port upgrade can keep up with. And while Canada has prepared infrastructure and fleets to take advantage of such openings, new climate data is now determining how realistic those ambitions truly are. Melting ice and rising stakes. The most decisive factor shaping Canada's Arctic ambitions today isn't simply planning or shipbuilding, it's the rapidly changing environment itself. In March 2025, the National Snow and Ice Data Center recorded the lowest winter maximum in history at 14.33 million square kilometers. In the same year, Environment and Climate Change Canada reported that summer sea ice in northern Canadian waters has been shrinking at a rate of about 7.2% per decade. These numbers show that conditions in the Arctic are shifting faster than policymakers once believed, making some scenarios more feasible and others more dangerous. For decades, the Arctic ice pack acted as a natural shield across the Northwest Passage, keeping it out of reach for all but the most specialized icebreakers. But today, summer ice is thinning earlier, and it reforms much later into the autumn. The result is measurable: seasons with more weeks of open water. Yet this is not a straightforward path toward easy navigation. Scientists caution that mobile multi-year ice, combined with narrow choke points, continues to make transits unpredictable from year to year. For shippers and policymakers alike, the message is mixed. There is far more potential access, but no guarantee of stability. This balance of openings and risks has direct consequences for Canada's strategy. For a long time, discussions about the Northwest Passage were framed in speculation. Investors doubted whether predictable windows would ever materialize. Now, evidence shows that the corridors are opening with regularity, often in the same places across multiple seasons. Even when sea ice persists, thickness levels have dropped, making icebreaker escorts more efficient. The key difference today lies not in assuming the route is ready, but in seeing usable patterns emerge often enough to justify planning. Compared to its historical reputation, the transformation is stark. Until recently, ships attempting the Northwest Passage required both extraordinary luck and heavy logistical support. Routes shifted unexpectedly, often blocking voyages or forcing costly detours. While those obstacles remain in some regions, many are no longer permanent. In recent summers, shipping firms have prepared trial voyages based on consistent observations of thinning ice. For these private actors, climate trend lines have changed perception. What was once written off as impossible now demands serious business calculations. Canada benefits directly from this evolution. An Arctic port or a new generation of icebreakers matters little if surrounding seas remain closed most of the year. But when open water extends into late summer and autumn, these tools gain real value. Churchill's port upgrades become practical trade infrastructure. Escort systems for commercial convoys become viable planning exercises. Importantly, though, this opportunity comes from the same global warming processes that carry heavy costs. The same heat that opens northern sea lanes contributes to fires, floods, and instability elsewhere. For Canada, however, the singular fact is that the Northwest Passage lies within its jurisdiction, giving Ottawa rare leverage in this global climate-driven shift. The changes also ripple through Russia's position. For decades, Moscow's strategy revolved around its northern sea route. That corridor, strengthened by a fleet of nuclear icebreakers, has been its central asset. The length and difficulty of the passage, though, never change. Sanctions and high operating costs add further challenges. Now, as the Northwest Passage emerges as a partial alternative, the calculations of shipping companies begin to shift. For carriers linking Asia and Europe, even the possibility of cutting thousands of nautical miles matters. Where Russia once counted on occupying the only Arctic corridor, it now faces a competitor backed not by ambition alone, but by measurable environmental data. Inside Canada, the implications stretch well beyond high-level geopolitics. Communities across the Northern Territories have relied for generations on irregular resupply. Open water that persists longer into the year means cargo ships can deliver food, fuel, and construction materials more frequently. Costly airlifts remain crucial for emergencies, but maritime resupply, once limited to narrow windows, now shows signs of expansion. This gradual change bolsters Ottawa's argument for heavy investment in infrastructure, from renovated ports to communications upgrades. The government frames these expenditures not as speculative bets, but as essential responses to conditions already visible in data. But more open water does not eliminate risks, it compounds them. Security planners know that each extra navigable week demands a corresponding increase in vigilance. Canadian Coast Guard crews must expect more incidents at sea, ranging from simple distress calls to environmental emergencies. Rangers and naval units face growing responsibilities in territories where frozen seas once reduced activity. Search and rescue becomes harder as commercial traffic grows, and oil spills or accidents in fragile ecosystems pose amplified dangers. For every statistic showing a decline in ice, there is a parallel spike in questions about how to manage the human and environmental risks that come with it. The numbers recorded in 2025 do not appear as anomalies. Rather, they are continuations of a multi-decade pattern. Each successive report with lower volumes of sea ice reinforces the same conclusion. The Arctic is ceasing to function as an unbroken wall. Where nature once enforced sovereignty by default, governments must now enforce it through presence and capability. For Canada, that shift validates decades of investment in shipbuilding and logistics. For Russia, it undermines an advantage built as much on geography and climate as on engineering. The trend lines themselves become geopolitical markers, forcing both states to adapt. For policymakers, these measurements are not abstract. They are evidence to present in international forums, foundations for territorial claims, and justifications in alliance negotiations. Investors, too, treat them as forecasts, markers of when it becomes prudent to spend on trial voyages or contracts. Activists and indigenous organizations, meanwhile, highlight the same statistics as urgent warnings. Melting ice raises questions about ecological resilience, traditional subsistence ways of life, and long-term cultural survival in the north. In this way, the same figure, record low ice cover, serves as justification, alarm, and bargaining chip, depending on who interprets it. The result is a changing Arctic that can no longer be confined to charts or seasonal forecasts. Every square kilometer of melted ice represents both a competitive opportunity and a new environmental concern. For Canada, the strategic impact is sharpened. The Northwest Passage is no longer a cartographic fantasy, but a space where sovereignty, commerce, and climate risk converge. This reinforces Ottawa's decision to continue investing in polar-class vessels and infrastructure, even if full-year navigation remains unlikely. Most experts still caution that the passage will not be reliably open year-round until mid-century. But that warning itself creates urgency, underscoring that states seeking influence have only a limited strategic window to establish control. In 2025, then, Canada's position in the Arctic rests not on speculation, but on measured change. Its plans appear less like distant aspirations and more like practical responses to data that grows more compelling each year. Russia's advantage narrows, commercial interest gathers momentum, and communities in the North glimpse both opportunities and dangers that once seemed remote. What was written off as unreachable now appears tangible enough to reshape how nations think about trade and sovereignty at the top of the world. And it is here that Canada finds itself poised with a singular advantage. The environmental shifts transforming the Arctic place one corridor squarely within its grasp, turning maps once filled with dashed lines and failed expeditions into potential highways of the 21st century. The Northwest Passage, Canada's strategic trump card. The Northwest Passage has emerged as Canada's most consequential strategic advantage in the Arctic. Once dismissed as a theoretical shortcut across frozen seas, it is now being weighed by shipping companies, policymakers, and rival states as a route that could reshape trade flows in the century ahead. The idea is straightforward. If this corridor functions as a viable shipping lane, it could shorten journeys between the Pacific and Atlantic by thousands of nautical miles. The difficulty and the opportunity lies in whether Canada can convert that theory into dependable practice. Geography shows why the passage matters. The current Asia-Europe shipping system relies on distant detours. One path runs south through the Strait of Malacca, across the Indian Ocean, then north through the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean. Another takes vessels east, around the Americas, and through the Panama Canal. Each journey stretches weeks at sea and devours fuel. Arctic alternatives offer competing efficiencies. The Northern Sea route along Russia's coast can shorten some Asia-Europe voyages by up to 40%, while a successful Northwest Passage transit could save several thousand nautical miles compared to either Panama or Suez. For industries where delivery speed translates directly to costs, even partial savings are attractive. The caveat is that these reductions only come when seasonal conditions allow and when Canada can deploy escort support to ensure safe passage. For shipping firms, those advantages are best understood through specific cases. In Manitoba, the Port of Churchill illustrates how Canada is anchoring abstract calculations in real-world facilities. Churchill is the country's only deepwater Arctic port connected to the continental railway system, and in 2024, its operators, the Arctic Gateway Group, signed an agreement with FedNav, the nation's largest bulk shipping company, to explore extending its operating season. This partnership links local development to international shipping ambitions, signaling how Arctic ports might evolve from seasonal supply outposts into trade gateways. When paired with icebreaker escorts, facilities like Churchill begin to transform the Northwest Passage from a speculative detour into a managed system. Still, the route comes with substantial challenges. Navigation remains complicated by unpredictable ice movement, shallow choke points, and rapidly changing weather systems. Early projections that the passage could replace existing global arteries underestimate these constraints. In reality, its use hinges on two practical pillars: Canada's ability to provide safe escort through ice and its ability to stage reliable search and rescue and port support along the corridor. Without these, the distance savings remain academic. With them, the waterway begins to look like a functioning maritime option. Canada's investments reflect this understanding. Icebreakers are being modernized to support escorts not just for research or resupply, but for commercial convoys. Training exercises in recent years have tested conv arrangements where cargo vessels move under Canadian escort through pre-surveyed channels. This system does more than break ice. It creates predictability for insurers, shipping executives, and foreign investors who hesitate without proof of operational reliability. Every demonstration convoy adds to the perception that the Northwest Passage is no longer improvised. It is structured, escorted, and regulated according to Canada's standards. This shift is significant when compared to earlier generations of Canadian icebreakers. For decades, these vessels played vital roles in resupplying northern settlements and supporting scientific missions, but lacked the range and capacity for sustained commercial support. The new designs, Polar-class ships under construction, alongside modernized medium icebreakers in service, changed that equation. Built to withstand higher pressures and equipped for multipurpose functions, they allow Ottawa to maintain repeated escort schedules and provide safety services over larger stretches of its Arctic archipelago. For foreign shipping companies, this service layer is the decisive factor. Melting ice alone does not make a safe corridor. Reliable icebreaking, rescue, and communication networks do. Russia's history on the Northern Sea route underscores this point. Moscow relied on its fleet of nuclear icebreakers to guarantee that its corridor remained functional. That ability gave Russia leverage, regardless of seasonal variability. Canada cannot replicate nuclear capacity, but it does not need to. Its strategy focuses on narrower choke points and concentrated operational areas. By aligning fleet resources along the critical legs of the Northwest Passage, it can offer dependable coverage without mirroring Russia's scale. In this way, Canada's escorts project functionality rather than brute force, a model tailored to targeted sovereignty and trade utility. The economic implications extend beyond shipping savings. A viable Northwest Passage reshapes logistics networks worldwide. Supply chains linked to East Asia would calculate delivery changes not only in terms of nautical miles, but in tangible scheduling for ports and industries in Europe and North America. Faster sailings increase competitiveness for resource exports, from Canadian minerals to hydrocarbons, by shaving days from voyages. While these effects remain contingent on escort availability and favorable conditions, they are real enough to attract careful interest from shipping firms, particularly as fuel and time costs weigh heavily on profit margins. Strategically, Canada gains another layer of leverage. International maritime law often turns on the difference between theory and practice. By organizing escorted convoys through waters it defines as internal, Ottawa accumulates evidence that its sovereignty is exercised in fact, not just on paper. This operational control, backed by ports, escorts, and regulations, furnishes a visible demonstration of authority.